tomorrow means once again right from the beginning, and today also we'll do some cleanup first like we used to do for Docker. My screen is visible, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so we have this pod and the two services which we created yesterday. So I will delete those. So the command is kubectl delete and just copy paste this pod. Okay, pod is deleted. So only the two services are remaining, and we'll delete those as well. Delete cluster IP and node port. So this is how we delete it. We cannot delete the service which is Kubernetes service. Now the second exercise we are doing it from the beginning again. So first we'll create an nginx pod kubectl run nginx pod, and the image which we are using is nginx, and this image is downloaded from Docker Hub. So it is creating the container. Meanwhile, we'll create the services as well. So the two services we are creating, first one is cluster IP, and the second one is the node port. So if we check with the kubectl get all command, we can see that the pod is running, and two services are running, cluster IP and node port. Okay, so even though this is a node port, it will also have a cluster IP. So we can check the cluster IP for both using this command curl, and the other one is this curl, but both we are accessing only the cluster IP. So for this there is no node port, okay, because this is we have defined it as cluster IP, and this has a node port. Node port means the port of the VM itself, DevOps VM. Okay, so to access it, curl localhost, we can access it on port number 31386. Okay, and we can also access it on the node's IP, that is the node port, that is 1.11 31386. Okay, if you access it from the outside, it will also be accessible, but we cannot access the cluster IP, only the node port we can access. Okay, so this is how we access the pods using services. Now it is also possible to get more details. Okay, so first the command is kubectl get all will give all the details of the pods and the services which are running. Okay, if you want to get only the services, we can do svc kubectl get svc. It will show only the services. If you do service, it will also work. svc or service, we can check. If we want to check only the pod, we can check only the pod, or instead of pod we can also write pods. Now one more command is kubectl get all. If you want to get more information about the pod, kubectl describe command is there. Kubectl describe pod, just copy paste it, we'll get the all the details of the pod. Okay, so if you see, it is giving all the details. the pod, the namespace. We haven't learned about namespace, but I'll let you know. Then the node on which it is running. Okay, and the IP of the pod. Okay, the pod has a different IP, and this service has different IP address. Okay, and why we need a service, I'll explain it now. So if you see, this is the IP of the pod 1.10.1.49.7. Due to some reason, if this pod get restarted, okay, then this IP will change. It will get some other IP 49.8, 9 or 10. Okay, again due to some reason, if it gets restarted, then again this IP keeps on changing, because pod or any container by nature is ephemeral. Ephemeral means it doesn't save the details. Okay, the contents are lost, even the IP configuration will be lost. That's why to have a static IP, we need these services. Okay, that's why the services was introduced, and it is just a virtual layer. A virtual interface is added, and it will get this IP address. This will not change. Even the pod changes, the pod IP changes. This IP will never change. The cluster IP, the node port never changes. Only the port will change, but this port will also not change. Okay, in short, the cluster IP never changes. That's why we need these services, and we do not access it directly the pod. Now, till now we have learned how to create the pod. Okay, but in production environment we do not directly create the pod. Okay, we first create the deployment, and the deployment creates the pods in at the back end. So we'll now learn how to create the pod from tomorrow onwards, or from next exercises. Will be creating only the pods, not the mm, only the deployments, not the pods. So the pod exercise is completed. In the exercise 2, the pod is completed, how to create a pod. Now we'll learn how to create the deployment, and you'll also see the difference between deployment and pod.
So
S-
bad.
yeah,
So one,
Yeah.
yes, tell me.
So every pod has a private IP and this service IP and node port IP. So if there are n number of pods, every pod has different service IP, different node port IP, and
Yes,
okay. So
and we map it like this. See, when I expose it, I'll tell that for this pod, create this service.
okay.
So the mapping is also done there.
so is there any main pod where through orchestration happen or
No,
where
that
everything is
orchestration is managed by Kubernetes. There is no other different pod.
there's no different pod or container?
Yeah,
Okay.
that is managed by Kubernetes itself.
So there are hundred of pods, hundred service cluster IP, hundred node port IP will be there.
So it depends if you want a cluster IP or node port.
Uh,
Just for the demo purpose, I have shown how to create the services. If you want for node port, if you want to access it from the outside world, you need node port. If you don't want to access it, you'll have the cluster IP.
okay. And if you want to access from the outside, then we need both, right? Cluster IP, node port IP, or only node port.
So whenever you create any type of service, node cluster IP will be always there.
Okay.
On top of it, we'll be creating node port. In future, we'll be creating load balancer IP and or external IP or
Okay.
ingress. Okay, so cluster IP will always be there. On top of it, we create a node port or any other type of service.
Okay. And in this case, it should be in the same VNet, subnet, or how it is.
That is means managed by Kubernetes. We don't need to worry about that.
Yeah. So if there is a /24 network, and if you are assigning two, three IPs for each
We
pod,
do not assign it. That's what I'm saying. It is automatically assigned by Kubernetes. We don't need to take care of the IP addressing.
oh, so you mean
We only give the we just map it, that this pod is mapped to this service. That's it.
oh, okay.
the next exercise which we are doing is for the deployment, and there is a difference between deployment and pod that we'll see now. So the others are still there. If you see kubectl get all, the pod and the two services are always there, means are already there. So now what I'm doing is I'm creating a deployment. Okay, instead of pod, I have written here the deployment. I'm giving it a name as nginx deployment. The image which I'm using is nginx again, and here I have defined number of replicas equal to 2. So let's check what it does. So it has created the deployment. Now let's check with kubectl get all what happens. So if you see, earlier we used to see only pod. Now one more field is there, that is deployment, and one more is replica set. Okay, so what's happening is, I'll do kubectl get all again. Now if you see, the deployment is created, the name is nginx deployment, and we asked it to create two replicas. So there are, it is checking if the two deployments are there or not. It is there, and whenever there are replicas, the replica set will also be created. So the desired replica set was 2, current is 2, so that is everything is okay. Then the desired deployments were 2, up to date are 2. Okay, available to everything is okay. So if you see properly, whenever we create a deployment, automatically the two pods are also created. Okay, that's why I said from now onwards we won't create only pod. Okay, we'll create a deployment, it will automatically create the pods. Okay, so if you see, the two pods are running, pod 1 and the pod 2, some different name is given at the end. Okay, so these two pods are created whenever we create the nginx deployment. Now for this also we can have services. So first one, similar to the earlier one, we are creating an nginx uh, cluster IP. Okay, so for this nginx deployment, this one I've created cluster IP, and will also create a node port. Okay, now just see kubectl get all. So if you see, this nginx cluster IP, this we need to remember is for this deployment, and this node port is for deployment. These two were for earlier pod. Okay, now for the deployment itself, we have this cluster IP and node port. And if you do curl for the cluster IP, it will work. Similarly, if you do curl for the node port also, it will work on the cluster IP as well as this particular port 31595. Curl 190, 192.168 1.11, and this IP 31595 1.11. Okay, same is accessible from the outside. Three one. If you don't see the difference, we'll open it in a new tab. Okay, so even though we are creating the deployment, it automatically creates pods at the backend. Just see kubectl get all, and if you see kubectl describe the deployment, we'll get more details. Okay, so what it is saying is, it has created the deployment, replicas, everything is given. Now let's see something interesting. So what we have defined here is kubectl deployment. It should have always two replicas. Okay, so what I'm doing is kubectl delete. But remember which pod I'm deleting? The pod for the nginx deployment. One of the pod I'm deleting. But before that, let me open one more session for the same. Otherwise, we won't notice the difference. kubectl get all. So we'll have to add micro k8s to it because we have added alias. So just watch. Okay. So it will refresh the screen with watch. Whatever we are doing is we are refreshing the screen every 2 seconds, so we can easily check the difference. So what I'm doing is I'm deleting one of the pods which is created by deployment. I've just deleted it. So when I delete it, let's check here what's happening. So what it did is it deleted one of the pod, okay, and it started creating it. Okay, even though I've deleted it, see, I deleted it earlier. It was D9 and CQ, and now if you see, D9 is still there, and instead of CQ it has added one more pod called JS. Let's again try to delete one more pod. So what I'm deleting is I'll delete this D9. Okay, when I delete it, if you see, it will start terminating one more and adding one more. So when it was deleting the other one, the traffic was served from the other pod which was running. That's why number of replicas is important, and this is how the high availability is achieved at the backend, because we define number of pods, number of replicas, and if you have only one replica, that is only one pod is there, it will not give you high availability. So to achieve high availability, we'll have to always define the number of replicas. Okay, even though the number of replicas are 2 or 3, the same service will be served. Okay, so this was all about the pods and the deployment exercise. Okay, so you all perform this exercise.